Hi everyone. My name is Juliet Haysom. I'm an artist and I teach within the foundation and undergraduate programs at the AA. This series called On Fabrication explores the relationship between designing and making and between designers and makers. The AA regularly hosts events in which architects discuss their work, but I think it's more unusual to hear directly from the fabricators, builders or makers who produce their designs. So this series aims to address that balance and to hear from both designers and makers on a more or less equal footing in order to better understand their collaboration and also the politics, poetics and practicalities that can define these kinds of exchanges. So this is the third and final one of 3 conversations in this series. 2 weeks ago, architect Amin Taha and stonemason Pierre Bedeau discussed their work on 15 Clerkenwell Close. And last week, carpenter and academic Peter Ballantyne discussed his working relationship with Donald Judd. Both these sessions will be available via the AA's YouTube channel. But this week, it's my great pleasure to introduce Fenella, Collingridge and Daren Bai. Fenella was Associate Designer at Walmer Yard. For many years, she taught architecture at the Royal College of Art. She currently teaches at the Architectural Association, where she was also a student, and has run research projects into the relationship between colour, volume, tone and texture in architecture. She exhibited Proposal B with Peter Salter at the Venice Biennale in 2018. Daren Bai has worked on regeneration projects, high-end refurbishments and bespoke new build developments. His attention to detail and quality has led to collaborations with some impressive artists, architects and designers on projects such as Walmer Yard, Camberwell Church and Proposal B, an installation designed and constructed for the Venice Biennale as well. So I'm going to hand over now to welcome Fenella and Daren, who'll be talking, I think, specifically about the concrete casting and some steelwork from Walmer Yard.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Yeah. Hi. Hello. It's Daren and I are going to talk today about the process of transforming Peter Salter's design drawings into a building in which the material reality has the same resonance as the drawings. This photograph, all the photographs of the Finnish site I'm going to show by Helene Benet, and this one shows the extraordinary colours that Anthony Malinowski worked on with us. As the builders make the building, and no matter how deep the thinking that's gone into the drawings, you have to make continuous adjustments to relate the reality of matter back to the original idea, to strip back, tune and refine. So this building's a bespoke building. There's a lot of material experimentation, and experimentation always involves risk. It's on a very tight site that gives very little room for error. And the story that we're about to show you is about what really mattered to us, how Peter, Daren and I worked together to realise the project. It's really nice to be at the AA to talk about Walmer Yard, because I always think of it as an AA project. Peter Salter taught at the AA for years. The client was a student of his in his unit, and that's Crispin Kelly, and I was in the year below him studying with Peter. All the people who've worked on the project in terms of the drawing teams, well, not all of them, but most of them have had some kind of relationship with the AA, or they've been taught by us, or we've taught with them. And that meant that we had automatically a kind of common language that we could refer to. And that there's one exception, actually, which is Hugo Keane, who came with Mole when we transferred the drawing packages into CAD, and then he stayed on a bit with Daren. Anyway, and obviously the photographs are by Helene. We met Helene at the AA, and Anthony Malinowski and me teach together at the AA. So we had a kind of, like, it was quite close, really, the relationship between everybody. So this is an AXO drawing by Peter, and I'm only showing Peter's drawings today. I'm not going to show the construction drawings or anything. Walmer Yard is on Walmer Road, which is between Notting Hill and Holland Park, but it's not a swanky part of Holland Park or Notting Hill. And it's a road with a disparate collection of not particularly interesting buildings on it. It has no real rhythm. So in this AXO, you can see it's very blank to the street at the bottom. The two, I think I can use a cursor. These two blank, quite blank facades that you can see again here. It's quite dumb to the street. And then immediately the ground falls away down to an underground car park and up a pedestrian ramp to this L-shaped courtyard, which faces south and is lined with timber louvers. Roughly speaking, the kitchens are on the lower ground floor. The rooms on the ground floor all open up into each other. The bedrooms are sort of squashed onto the first floor with the lower, compressed with the lower ceiling height. And then the top floor has sitting rooms and what we call yurts, but they're nothing like yurts. They're asymmetrical domes. And in this section, you can see that raised tabletop courtyard. I love this drawing because obviously you never see the building like this, but it starts to talk about this quiet pocket of space inside the project. And here is the courtyard, two photographs of the courtyard. And it's a space that's about quietness, so that geometries break up the sound, the timber louvers are all adjustable and they give privacy. The grey render is an acoustic tunnel spray that you normally use in tunnels, and that absorbs a lot of sound. And the building's built of two skins of concrete up to the top of the benches, you can see, and then it continues as a single skin of concrete inside the rooms. So I think it's a project about interiority. Even this shared courtyard space, which faces south, is like conceived of as a room with these massive benches. And on the ground, you can see end grain oak cobbles. So this is a very early model that I worked on with Anthony for the colours, but I'm showing it really so you can see that inner pocket of space, and also how the plan splits and cranks so that every room has more than one aspect of light. This is a excuse me, full set of plans. This is the ground floor, lower ground floor and ground floor. There's 4 houses. This is house 1. House 2 comes back to here along this party wall. House 3 runs along the back of the site, and house 4 is what we call the sunken house. So that's the top floor, and then it's pressed down into the tabletop. And then this is the courtyard here. Car park level below, bedroom level, and the sitting room level. But as the site's tight and the rooms are actually quite small and intimate, you can see that the circulation is an incredibly important part of the scheme. There are 2 big cantilevers here and here that almost close the courtyard space off from the street, making it even more private. And these big lozenge staircase drums, I sort of think of them as table legs, really. They're sort of holding up the large transfer slab that's the courtyard. The geometries look very complex and fluid, but there are very strict rules and patterns to them. Every room has at least one right angle, and around the courtyard, all of the walls are either parallel or perpendicular. It was essential to understand how those rules worked and maintain them not only in the drawings, but also in the project. This is an earlier hand-drawn plan of the ground floor. I think you can really see the twists. So every time you enter a room, you walk around one of these steel bathroom pods through the shadow before you come to light. And as you walk up through the elliptical staircases, they give you a wider landing on the turn. So you're constantly being turned away almost before you enter a space. And that extends your feeling of the set of it sort of extends the experience of the size of it somehow. That's not a bit clumsily said, but it's true. The concrete pieces are obviously structural and massive, and they're gentle in their geometry and in their surface treatment. They carry light and shadow. The dark steel bathroom pods are things that you always walk around before coming into a room, so you're constantly turning through shadow before coming back to a muted light. And the two parts of the scheme we're going to talk about today are the concrete and the bathroom pods. And concrete was essential because of its thermal mass and its acoustic properties, but also because of the casting process communicated the fluid geometries of the plan and the section. There had to be a structural refinement as there was no padding in this building or site to hide behind. The building is pared back, taut, characteristics that are derived from the way the materials are cut, cast, ground to reveal their structure and their colour. I love this drawing because this was one of the first translations from the hand drawing into CAD drawings. And I think it's interesting to see how the design intention can so easily be lost or changed as you move from one process to another, from one set of definitions to another. And all the redlining, and that's me and Peter kind of correcting all the geometries that somehow got a bit flabby when they were taken into the CAD drawings. And I sort of think that it was hard. It was quite hard work doing that in a drawing, but then imagine that we had to do that on site as well. So it's that kind of trying to keep control of all of it, and keeping that rigour was a struggle throughout the project for all of us. And the great thing about working with Daren was that from very early on, he really understood what mattered to us and how to translate that into construction. This is a drawing of the ramp, which Daren's going to talk a lot about making the shutters for. Peter knew a lot about concrete because he'd worked on the second arts building in Bath with the Smithsons. So actually we sort of knew quite a lot about what we wanted to achieve. But even here, you can see that all the red patches were areas we were going to scabble. But in the end, we just scabbled the pieces that hadn't quite worked. And so scabbling became a technique for us to repair concrete. And here's a photograph of Anthony's colours on the two cantilevers. So you come up the pedestrian ramp, you can see the scabbling and some of the board marking underneath the one of the cantilevers that protects you from getting rain, and the other one on the other side is to get cars underneath and contains house 2 staircase. This is one of Peter's drawings of the stair lozenge drums, concrete elliptical stair drums. You can see, sorry, you can see that the panel sizes and the bar hole and the tie bar holes are already completely worked out. There's a recessed kicker for attaching formwork for each pour. There's a pocket, a recessed pocket next to each door opening for the light switches, entry phones, thermostats, etc. And you can also see recessed pockets within the wall for steel folded lights. So the principle here really was that the concrete held all of the services within itself, and where there were moments of inhabitation, they were also sort of pushed back, cast back into the surface. So we didn't have anything on the ceilings. If we had to have a heat detector, it was cast back into a pocket. And here's the finished kitchen of House 1. And you can see that there's no surface mounted servicing. The extractor fan for the hob is cast into the floor slab, and all the electrics are running up through that panel. And you can see the birch, the phenolic ply outer skin of the Serre drum as it comes through. This is a set of Peter's drawings of the internal concrete elevations. And if you look at the middle one, the centre one, that's for a bedroom. And you can see running through all of them, there's a 2.1 metre datum line that was cast into the concrete. Windows, the slot window at the top comes down to meet it. And it runs right the way through all the rooms of the project. There's a low window for lying in bed and looking out of. The central window has the louvers in front of it, so it has a muted light to it. And the top slot window shines light across the vinyl ceiling. Oh, sorry, the concrete, underside of the concrete ceiling, which we cast against vinyl, but I'll talk about that in a bit. And here's a photograph of the bedroom. This is in House 2. And you can see the relationship between the bed and that slot window and the louvers on the middle window. So the other thing that we're going to talk about today is the steel. These are 2 bedrooms in House 3. And you can see that datum, the 2.1, running over all the doors and above the steel partitions, where we used curved Georgian wired glass, which holds the light. And I think because the plan's quite kind of tight and complex, and you're often moving around something or stepping up into these private parts of rooms, this open ceiling plan that stretches right back through all the floors just kind of frees up the space. I can't really describe it, but anyway, it makes it feel as though you've got an open plane above you. It's quite beautiful. This photograph's from the sunken house, but it shows a lot about that ceiling, the underside of the ceiling. So that was cast against the hospital vinyl, and you can see how it's pulling light back from the slot window. And also you can see a huge retaining wall, which is less than 2 meters away from the window. But because of the board marking was kind of carrying this gentle light and shadow, I mean, to me, it's a bit like an Agnes Martin drawing or something, but it kind of really takes away the closeness. It feels like there's quite a lot of distance in there, and that wall's north facing, so it's very subtle, the light and the shadow that it casts. And this photograph I'm just going to talk about for a little bit, because this was, we sort of, before we even started on site, we'd done quite a lot of concrete research. We knew that we were going to use GGBS, which is ground granulated blast furnace slag as part of the concrete. We also sorry, hang on. We also knew that and the GGBS makes the concrete a bit lighter. We knew we were going to use Thames River estuary gravel as the aggregate because we were going to be scabbling, and that meant that when we revealed the aggregate, we wanted it to be rounded and not jagged. We knew we were polishing seeding and polishing the same concrete to make the floors. We already had an idea that we were going to cast against birch face ply up to 2.1 metre datum, and then phenolic ply above, which makes it slightly shinier, so that the underside of the reflective ceiling and the top part of the wall have the same tone to them. This is inside one of the staircases of inside house 2, and you can see that things that we didn't know was that we could use the scabbling technique to remediate walls that hadn't quite worked so well. Maybe they had too many air bubbles in them or something. So the whole of that lower part of the concrete has been scabbled. It's been ruled with a straight edge and then scabbled. And I always laugh about this because those glass lights, they're boat deck lights, which are a standard kind of component if you own a narrow boat, but they're actually extremely beautiful. And this is a staircase where we've inserted the steel stair, and you can see the rope, which was stitched into leather that just takes the twist of the staircase. I think it was also really important knowing when to leave things and when you had to make something good. So this slide, which shows part of the elliptical stair, you can see the vinyl's lifted a bit, but that somehow makes it feel softer. It sort of looks like a material, but then just to the side of it there's a scabbled area where obviously the concrete had just broken down a bit more, so we decided to scabble that back. And concrete's really receptive to light and colour. It's absolutely beautiful. And so this is just a timber-lined window reflecting into the elliptical drum of the staircase. But very early on, there was one time when someone came to try to persuade us to put pigment in the concrete to make it a more uniform colour, and it looks a bit like old dog biscuits. But I think it became really important to us that the finish and the tonal quality of the concrete was what gave it its nature. So we tried not to sort of muck around with that, really. Oh, Daren's going to talk about this later, but I just want to show it because this definitely comes from the AA. So I call these the squid eye lights, but I was walking through the bar, I think I was teaching or on a crit or something, and some students had cast some balloons into some plaster, and they'd made this fantastic sort of dish shape in the plaster. And when we were working out how to put these are boat deck lights as well, these little glass prisms through the skin of the concrete, it seemed that we could use the balloon shape to hold the light, because it's sort of somehow that shape is actually catching the light from the prism. Anyway, I just wanted to show it to you to say thank you to whichever group of students it was who'd cast a load of balloons in some plaster, although Daren might not want to thank them. Anyway, that's what we were aiming for. And this is what we were faced with. And Daren had to control. That's Peter, that's me on site. So you can see the size of the size bit. And it's a photograph taken from the top of the crane. I'm going to hand over to Daren for a while. But what absolutely amazed me during this whole process was each time anything happened, everything moved on the site in order to make space for it to happen. And even that took so much effort. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Daren. Oh, I wanted to say one thing, and it's really important just before you start, Daren, that I don't know where this comes from, but it's true. Concrete is only as good as the man who makes the shutter. And Daren is a joiner by trade, and he worked together with someone called Noel O'Connor, and they made the most beautiful shutters. And then we had really beautiful concrete. And I'm handing over so he can tell you about making the shutters.
Thanks, Fenella. So when we first came to this project, Peter and Fenella, along with numerous assistants and collaborators, had already been working on the design for some time, and for all intents and purposes had a buildable scheme. The question that needed to be answered was how we was going to go about putting this project into construction. The project had been shelved for a period of time, but Crispin came to an arrangement with his brother Sebastian to fund the project, and he brought me on board to construct the project. The project quickly gained a new momentum and life, and everyone seemed quite excited about getting this project finally underway. The first process to undertake on site was to create a site setup and the setup of 14 party wall awards. As you can see, we're hemmed in by everybody. We then could get on with some demolition once that was in place, but this took about 12 months to realise, and this gave us enough time to work through the concrete package with Peter and Fenella and Hugo. It was agreed to bring on board a managing architect in the form of Mole Architects and Hugo Keane, who produced over 350 drawings for this project, based on meetings and discussions with Peter and Fenella. There was already a vast number of hand-drawn drawings and details, and also drawings produced by other architects, and this information was all used by Mole to put a construction package of drawings together. As we started getting into the process, we quickly became aware that this drawing package was generally very useful for setting out the whole scheme, positioning the walls and everything like that. But the actual detail and feeling that Peter and Fenella was looking for had to be achieved in another way. And that was for us to have weekly site meetings to discuss every single detail of the project and go through how we was going to tackle it. With this, we discussed every week, used original hand-drawn details, and with the aid of Peter's sketchbook, we could agree the design and detailing of every process. My role in this project was always made very clear and by Seb and Crispin, and that was to build this project exactly as Peter and Fenella wanted it. Wanted it built. These weekly meetings helped form a great bond and friendship between us, and it helped them realise our strengths and for us to have a good understanding of what they look to achieve, both practically and aesthetically. And I think the best results from these meetings were usually formed after the weekly pub lunch. Fenella was always the voice of reason in these meetings, unless there was a chance of using gold leaf anywhere. So next slide. Next slide, that's it. During the process of work through the concrete package, it was agreed that we would have to produce sample panels for all the concrete finishes. Luckily, we had a space in London where we could build a sample room containing all the finishes to be used on site. So we were able to agree on the concrete mix, types of releasing agent, types of timber for the board mark concrete, and the striking times. There was 9 different concrete details to incorporate into the project. Next slide. These drawings show the detail provided to us to provide to construct the shutters for the elliptical staircase. The finish on the ellipse externally was poured against phenolic shutters, and internally against birch face ply. The shutters for these staircases were made off-site at a joinery shop, and Noel, the joinery manager, came up with a scheme for the shutters. Next slide. To enable them to be used on all 3 elliptical staircases. The shutters had no face fixings, as we did not want to see any nail or screw marks in any of the concrete, so everything was fixed from the rear. The design was made so that everything could be bolted together and easily stripped down by the site operatives. The shutters lasted nearly to the end of the staircases, all 3 of the staircases, and we just had to reskin them for the final pour. Next slide. As you can see from this photo again, the site had lots of issues, and the main issue was space. We had a crane which was situated in the centre of the courtyard, and this moved the shutters to their required positions. To install in situ concrete on any site, you realise very quickly that the shutters, push pulls and braces take up a lot of room. And when the shutters are not in use, they have to be stored on site. It's very clear from this photo taken from the crane exactly how tight the site was for space, especially considering the nature of the works. The shutters for the staircase, when fully erected, were 4.8 metres high, 7 metres long and 4 metres wide. And in lots of concrete projects, you can use the shutter for a pour, strike the shutter and then move it to the next pour. In this project, we could only use the staircase shutters. Everything else had to be individually made for every single pour. Next slide. During the process, we agreed the actual design of the concrete, the correct quantity of GGBS and consistency of the concrete. This photo shows a slump test being carried out to confirm that the consistency of the concrete will be suitable for the shutter it is intended for. When the concrete lorry arrives on site, everything has to be ready to go, as we only have about an hour to unload each lorry. The concrete is poured from the concrete lorry into either a concrete skip, which is transported to its place by the crane, or a concrete pump, and then poured at a steady space into the shutter, while the concrete finisher uses a vibrator, removes all the air from the mixture, and pushes the concrete against the face of the shutter. This process will be completed to the exact method and timing that we had specified using forming from the test room. The majority of concrete pours on this project were completed using the skip method, as we had used this method on the test room. The concrete was placed and correctly vibrated. Then we allowed the concrete to cure for a specific period, which was different for each pour. For instance, you see on this photo here, we actually let the boardmark timber shrink back itself and fall off, rather than trying to take it off, because it just made too much damage to the shutter. After this, after we'd got the concrete into the shutter and we was waiting for the correct time, there was nothing we could do. And we had to just wait for the shutter to be removed before we could see if the desired finish had been achieved. In some instances, the finish was not perfect, and the idea of taking down a concrete wall was very off-putting. So Peter and Fenella came up with a solution to the issues. The main remedy involves scabbling back any areas that had too many holes in the surface. There was no filling or face repairs carried out on this project. Again, with this site being so tight, while we was waiting for a pour to cure, we was already progressing with the next shutter and pour that linked to the previous one. So in most cases, if the finish of the previous pour was not 100% satisfactory, then we would have to move on regardless and deal with the issues in another way. Thankfully, a majority of the concrete work turned out to be a very high standard. Next shutter, next slide. So this picture shows a shutter where we constructed on site on the floor, and this would be lifted from the base and positioned using the crane. In pretty much all circumstances, a kicker would have previously been installed, and this is what the shutter would be pushed against to form a sill. On a two-sided wall, there would be a shutter on both sides fixed firmly with spacer bars and divvy bars. These are sealed against the shutter using cones, and on this project we specifically made the cones very small. That's what Peter wanted. Next slide. This picture shows much reinforcement there was placed in the staircase of house 2. As you can see, the reinforcement is very restrictive and densely situated. This caused lots of problems for the concrete finisher. And in this instance, we had to use external shutter vibrators as we couldn't get the poker through the reinforcement. There was too much reinforcement in there. The staircase to house 2 had lots of issues, as you can see from this next photo. We had a cantilever with an angled soffit. Everyone was worried about this angled soffit. There was lots of discussions and arguments over this as to how the finish would actually turn out. And in the end, we just agreed that we would get on with it and pour it. However it turned out, it would stay and be remedied on site. And luckily, it turned out very well. There was no real filling or anything to do with that. So the board mark concrete was discussed in great depth for this site. And for each board mark wall, we was given by Hugo a very colourful detail of the exact percentages and thicknesses of boards and where they went. This was all screwed from behind to a sheet of ply, so no face fixing again. And then this was so that no screw marks could be seen in the concrete. And this in turn was fixed from behind to the framework of the shutter. This picture shows the shutter in production in the joinery workshop. Noel, who built these shutters, is actually portrayed a joiner and furniture maker. So the shutters, as you can see, are immaculate joinery items, which shows in the concrete. This shutter could only be installed when the courtyard was completed and the stairs to the ramp was in situ. It was in situ. And as you can see, we had to deliver this by lorry and handboard it into site because we couldn't do this until everything was in place. So this was a final pour. This shutter has always amazed me to this day, how Noel has managed to get the shutter so perfect that the lozenge-shaped lights on either side of the shutter met millimetre perfection. Both sides of the shutters were curved. They was at different heights and on different planes, one angling down towards the garage and the other angling up the staircase towards the courtyard. Yeah, he took some site dimensions and then brought this to site and it just bolted together perfectly. Next slide. This picture shows the stair drum in position and the setting out of the floor that's connected to the stair drum. With the concrete floors, we installed the shuttering underneath and propped this. This was then covered in a vinyl flooring with spacers, then the reinforcement, and then, as you can see, the kickers are all set out onto the floor, ready for construction of walls coming above. So this is sort of very nearly a day or 2 days away from a pour. The concrete works in general brought up a number of challenges in relation to how to form the shutters and how to successfully pour the concrete. The shutter in this picture shows a section of the light scoop, which was designed on the shape of Peter's arm. In the joinery shop again, manufactured this off-site. The shutter is formed from vertical board sections and it curves both horizontally and vertically. Along with this, we had to position window openings and light scoop shapes for the Prism Lights. Next, so these Prism Lights that had to be installed as shown in this picture. The moulds for these lights were the only part of the concrete project that was manufactured by an outside source and were dimensioned and positioned using sketches produced by Peter. This light scoop stems from a crucifix-shaped column in the garage, and this column in turn holds up the ground floor slab, and then each floor is supported onto the light scoop. This means the light scoop is again very densely packed with reinforcement, and again this created massive issues with how we was going to vibrate it, get the finish and get the air. The scoop had to incorporate the electrics as well as before we poured, so everything was in place before the pour. This picture shows the courtyard window, lower section of the windows and the fin section to the top of window, all had to be poured at the same time. The shutter was made for the entire wall, and we had to place 100mm pipes into the top window, this one, and into the lower sills as well. So that was a method of both getting the concrete to the areas where it wouldn't flow and wouldn't raise to, and also for us to vibrate the areas. The thin sections at the top have actually got a shaped recess built into them as well, just to make it slightly more difficult. And that was to take a stainless steel channel for an LED light at a later date. So you want to go back 2 slides, Fenella, if you can. So in this this picture is pretty good. It shows all 4 big issues: the stair drums, the light scoop at the back with the ball mark concrete, the thin window section, and the vinyl ceiling that was the concrete that we cast against the vinyl ceilings. That's it. Back to the. So in the other sections of the work, such as the steel pods for the bathroom, we had to really investigate the setting out to help save as much space as possible. So the way we decided to do this was we took the drawings and created one-to-one templates on site, or rod drawings. Next slide for them. So we basically narrowed down everything that we could. We made templates of the toilet pans, the shower trays, the basins, and we literally walked around with these in the room, making sure there was enough room everywhere. We plotted exact pipe runs and exact positions of the sanitary ware items, and then we delivered these templates in whole to the manufacturers. This one shows how the soil pipe comes through, shows the actual route to the toilet and everything. And then this would translate into the grid that was constructed, and then to the metalwork. So the metalwork company took these and detailed them up in their own programs for their CNC to cut the metal. And then they brought the grids to site. We fitted these grids up into site, put all the pipe work in, the cables in, and then they came to site and welded on the fabric, the 3mm steel covering throughout. There was a site, yeah. And then on completion of this, we used a special wax product to protect the steel. When the steelwork was up and completed, we then set out the tops for the Georgian glass. And the Georgian glass we had to measure and template. This is a sketch of Peter's showing exactly how he wanted us to create the fins that go through the joints of the glass, and basically Harry wants to see the bathroom pod. So this is what we worked on to do the one-to-one details. And that's about it. The project was completed in general by quite a small team, but because of the Wednesday meetings, it was a good line of communication, an enjoyable line of communication, and everything pretty much got solved with the use of Peter's sketchbook. We managed to get around every issue on site. And that's it for me, Fenella.
I'm just going to show you a couple of photographs of the Finnish bathroom pods. Although actually this one hasn't got the fins on yet, but this is house one. You can see that the steel curved around the bath, and we painted the inner linings of the steel pods to stop them rusting, which Anthony and Melanovsky and I worked on the colours for. But when we originally had them, we didn't have that whole subframe in between the two skins, and we were using thicker steel. We imagined the steel was going to be a bit thicker. And we thought of them as giant radiators so that we could run hot water pipes and things behind where you hung your towels. So we used to kind of think of all the things that would be nice to have in a bathroom. And eventually, it was quite strange actually, because the process of them being drawn the CAD process, they actually got much more flabby almost, and that's why the templating was so important. So we had to cut the nose off the shower tray to give you somewhere to go into it, but also to make it tighter so that we could fit more in, because otherwise they were taking up too much of the actual rooms. But I just wanted to show you this because the darkness of the steel kind of started to almost carry light. It's quite beautiful, really. And this is in house one, when I said that in the plan, the ground floor is a set of rooms that can kind of open and close from each other. This is a large pivoting door that Daren made with the glass above, and that opens one space to another, and above it you can see the ceiling, cast ceiling. And these two final images are of two of the staircases as the steel. I thought it would end the talk because here the steel's inserted into the concrete drum. But that's another whole story of how we did that. Anyway, that's what we were going to say. Oh, there was one thing I wanted to say, which was... just to sum up, really, where people have added things or amended the original design, it's always come from conversations between all of us, and the people who were invited to help always had very precise knowledge. I think it's really critical to know when to take advice and to listen, when to trust people, or when just to say thank you very much and politely walk away, because some of the advice we were given was not so helpful. And there's one other thing which in David Pye's book, The Nature of Workmanship, he talks about the workmanship of risk. And I think this sums up Daren, really. Workmanship using any kind of technique or apparatus in which the quality of the result is not predetermined, but depends on the judgment, dexterity, and care with which the maker exercises as he works. This is the workmanship of risk. That's in praise of you, Daren. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Do you want me to stop sharing, or
yeah, why not? That's so wonderful to hear you both. Thank you. I was thinking. So, firstly, I'm sorry I forgot to mention at the beginning that if anybody would like to ask a question, please do write it in the chat, and I'll pass that on. But I wonder, this is both for Fenella and Daren, that I would assume that for a lot of students studying, that the more precise a CAD drawing, the better in terms of like clear instruction, or that being the primary language of instruction. So to hear you, Fenella, talk about the CAD drawing being flabby twice. No, don't apologise. But I'm really interested in that, and also the last drawing that you showed, Daren, of Peter's sketchbook. That seeming like the Wednesday lunches, yes, that one. That the Wednesday lunch and the conversation over a sketch that's that discursive is maybe where the decision making happens, and not in the meticulous precision that a CAD drawing maybe describes. And I wonder if you can say a bit more about that, and whether you think that's something quite unique to this project and this design team, or whether you think that's true of other projects you've worked on as a sort of universal rule in your experience.
Is that for me, is it?
Both, yeah, both of you.
Both. Yeah, for me, it was Peter's drawings in general. Maybe not the sketches, but the drawings in general are works of art, and you can really get a lot from them. With CAD, for me, is perfect for exact details, setting out and stuff like that. But if you want to get some kind of a feel into the work, Peter's drawings described it better to me. I could understand them better. And after working with him for quite a while, I really did understand, I think he backed me up on this, that I could produce what he wanted from his drawings. I don't really know whether I could have got the same from CAD. Everything was there was an example of a handrail in House 2 that we just sort of drew on the wall, and then we bent metal pieces to that handrail, and it looks amazing now. It's got a coat hooks coming off of it, and the handrail blends in. And I think that could have only been done there and then on site, discussing it and moving the metal around while we was doing it. I think that was the only way. I can't see that I could have got that from CAD. That
handrail that he's talking about, I think we had to template part of it, and I just want to tell you, templating is not as easy as you think. So I think the bit that goes up the stairs, I was left thinking, I can do this. I've just got to draw it 1-to-1, and then they'll cut it. And it was actually quite. It's hard work making a 1-to-1 template.
I think that was quite a few Wednesdays just on that handrail.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Alina, who asks if precast was ever considered an option for the construction. And I think that's something I was wondering too, because I imagine that, particularly given the tight constraints of the site, whether that was something you weighed up as pros and cons.
We did actually. Before Daren came into the project, there was a man who I think has a whole load of leftover precast panels from Ireland, and we were talking about whether it would be how much of it we could do precast, and then whether we could use some of the precast panels almost as to make the form work for some of the more curved pieces. But it just was too complicated, really, actually. We didn't have enough repetition, really, to make it work, because everything was different. It would have been a nightmare, I think. So we didn't in the end. And I think also it always has a different look to it. You can't really feel. The thing about the concrete in this project is it really reveals how it was made. And I think you sense that. It's like looking at a piece of furniture where you can see how it's been made and the craftsmanship and the way things are settled and the height of the pour. You sort of read all that, and it gives another language to quite an intimate language, which I don't think we'd have got with precast at all.
Yeah. There's a question from George asking what Daren's perception was both before and after the project of working creatively with architects, and I quote. So maybe Daren, I don't know if this is the kind of language of translation that you're used to with, or is familiar with other projects, or if it was distinctively different, and how your perception changed.
It was different, obviously, in its design, but in our sort of field, we always try to give the architect or the designer what they want. We try to get on board with them, really. It's the only way. There were some strange decisions as we was working through this project, and I thought they might not turn out that great, and they did. Peter and Fenella were normally right with a lot of the stuff. In terms of what amazes me on this project is when you actually look at you get a vision of what Peter wanted to create with his hand-drawn details at the start of this project. And if you actually stand in the courtyard and look at what he's achieved, it is exactly as his first attempts of drawing, basically. I don't know how he sort of visualized the space and the lights coming through at the top of House 4. It is quite amazing. But in terms of working, every architect that we work for is different, and everyone gives us a different sort of way to work. But it's just trying to achieve what they want to look at. I think we can do that. I think we've done it with this anyway.
Yeah. Joe asks, says that they love how the embracing or response to imperfections as they arose, are expressed in this project. And they say in all building sites, this is normally pre-cooked, but it's almost as if you invited these imperfections and conflicts. Do you think that's true to say? When Fenella's talked about risk, that there was like a level at which that sense of some uncertainty gives it that character of kind of craftedness.
I think when things did go slightly wrong, it actually made us work a lot harder, so that the scabbling had purpose. It wasn't just decorative. Or at one point there was a party wall in house 2 that we just couldn't take down. It's so expensive to take down and difficult, but we actually couldn't take it down because we would have damaged the property next door. And so we decided to grind the entire wall back. So we got this absolutely beautiful kind of ground back concrete wall, which looked awful when it came out of the shutter. So I think a lot. Every time there was a problem, it was an opportunity actually to make something more, almost more refined. That's how I always thought about it. We did used to joke, and we used to say, wood is good, because Daren, because he was running a joinery workshop, we knew that if we could solve it in timber, it would be the easiest way. So we'd look at what was happening on the site, and if we couldn't do that, then we'd go for wood is good. And I'm sure that the gold leaf was just because that was the most expensive remediation we could do. So if I said gold leaf, we'd get something else we wanted that was cheaper.
Actually,
anyway, so we had we did everybody worked incredibly hard, I think, because I think that's part of it. If you have to solve a problem and it's hard work to solve a problem, you get a better result, really. That's how I used to look at it anyway. All good, time to improve something.
Wow. There's a question from Fred. How did you manage the money? Is that a challenge in an exploratory process of making compared to having, a fixed budget?
Well, I can't. That's not one I can answer. I think it wasn't that, but I don't think it was as bad as everyone thinks. But I'm not going to answer that. Daren, what do you think?
I'm glad I didn't have to pay for it. To be honest, it was there was a budget to start off with, which was based on a bill of quantities, which was,
I think Jackson
if you had read it without looking at the drawings, was very, very straightforward detailing. Nothing like what we ended up building. I think to manage the budget, to be honest with you, I think that the more our relationship grew, but me, Peter, Fenella, and David on site, we realised that we tried to constrain any spending and tried to think of the best and cheapest ways to do everything, but still achieve the end result. That's all I can say on that. We tried.
Yeah.
We did have a huge amount of goodwill behind us as well. Like stupid things like, the cheese basins were virtually given to us by the company. Daren is very good at negotiating prices for things, and I'm really bad at it, but he actually has taught me to be quite good at it. There was a lot of goodwill and really a lot of negotiating prices.
Yeah. Takako asks if you could talk about whether there were any discussions about sound and whether that came into play perhaps with your, the test panels. She asks about resonance and echoes bouncing against different materials and so on.
Yeah. Well, we had in the thing about the concrete is it's very good for, obviously it's matte and airborne sound, but it's not good at vibration. So in some places we put we called them giant Birkenstock rugs, but we found this cork product, which is like an industrial cork and resin product that is just Birkenstock really. And we made great big rugs of Birkenstock set into the concrete so that sound from, say, kitchens to bedrooms wouldn't be transferred. So we did things like that. And then we had, where we didn't have concrete, we had clay plaster with timber onto timber beads, and that was very good with sound. It absorbs a lot of sound. And it's, we did think about it a bit, quite a lot. And then we had things like a lot of timber was quietening the noise of the project. But inside the stairs do make a sort of quite a strange sound up through the concrete drums. It's quite beautiful sound. There was a lot of talk about whether we were going to put felt runners on the stairs or leather runners, or whether we were going to use something from a car engine to absorb the sound on the underside of the stair. So we did think about those things, but in the end, we just quite like the sound. It's not a nasty sound, it's just quite a nice sound inside the stair drums.
From a building perspective, the only issues we had really for building control was the party walls between house 2 and house 3. So we had to construct them. They was constructed as cavity walls with insulation and to resilient details. That was it really.
Miguel asks for a little bit more detail on the practicality around the concrete remediations. Or rather, as he puts it, the corrections. So just wonder if you can give a bit more precision about exactly how that was worked on. For example, he's asked about jackhammers, or whether it was hand ground, and what kind of tools or processes were used.
So with the concrete, when we had an issue, we would mask an area off, and we would actually use a needle gun or a scabble gun and literally scabble that to a depth. So if there was too many air pockets to the surface, we would select a shape, and then we would scabble that through to bring the aggregates through and make it more of an even finish across the face. I think that's one of the key things on this project as well, where you mentioned precast earlier. There is definitely a character to in situ concrete, with a few blemishes and a few holes. It really does look quite special. So we only sort of really tackled the areas that were overly blemished, in a sense. That's the only areas we looked at to scabble back. That's it for now.
Great, yeah.
The thing is, though, I think there was one point where we had a concrete repair man come in, wasn't there, just for a day or something. And what they do is they sort of fill the mistake, and then they try and sort of fake up the colour. And the whole thing is horrid, actually. So we weren't very, you can't really see it, but it's been done, and it just didn't seem, and also it's quite expensive. I think it was expensive, the concrete repair man, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And I think from certain lights, you can always see that it's been repaired.
I think that might be a career I could move into, concrete repairing. It's been quite good at painting.
You and Anthony could get
I kept saying to Daren, give me the pigments and the stuff and I'll do it. But we found another way in the end.
There's a question. Well, actually, if I can combine two questions, one from Sam and one from Stephen. Sam asks, how the client reacted to the level of risk or uncertainty and complexity in the project. And Stephen asks what form of contract was used. And I wonder if those two things maybe overlap, those two questions.
From my point of view, I think it was just I think it was a JCT I can't remember. It was just a standard JCT contract with a certain element of design and build, believe it or not, on this project. In terms of the client's view, I think that anyone looking at this project would understand. Crispin's a clever man. He's an architect himself. I think he understands the whole risk and the concept he was taking on. There was never any sort of views of cutting anything back, really. There was occasional discussion about cost, but really it was all about giving Peter and Fenella what they wanted and building what they wanted. From my point of view, I think the client was just pushing to get the exact vision correct. It was pretty good, to be fair. Pretty good all the way through.
I think the thing is, we all already knew each other. So I think because Crispin had been taught by Peter, he knew what he was letting himself in for.
Fenella, sorry, someone's asking, and it's a good point. Could you possibly unshare your screen so we can see your faces?
Yeah, sorry. Oh, hang on.
Yeah, that's it. Perfect.
Does it start?
Yep. So I think maybe this is quite a timely, because I think in the three events of this series on fabrication, the word fabrication implies not just to make, but also to make up. And there's a level of kind of storytelling quite often around projects when they're completed that, maybe when projects go less well, it's perhaps the story less willing to be told. But there's a question here from Eleonora who asks about what's irritating or disappointing from the point of view of a builder to an architect and vice versa. So perhaps if you've got examples without naming anyone particularly of other projects you've worked on, and what you like to look for in a productive reciprocal relationship.
This to me, sorry.
Yeah, to both. So basically, when in working with architects, she asks specifically what annoys or disappoints you as a builder working with an architect, and as an architect, what annoys you or disappoints you working with a builder. What's the sort of, you've talked a lot about how this has been a really positive working relationship. So I think she's presumably asking what to avoid and other nameless examples that you might. She's a student at the moment. I know Eleonora from the AA. So.
From my point of view, it's great to work with people who are good at what they do. So in this project, Peter is an exceptional designer. The buildings are amazing, and everyone we collaborated on with Fenella and Hugo, and I see Anthony there with the colours and stuff. It was a real pleasure to work on. So in terms of what to avoid, I think it's everyone should be realistic. So for an architect to do a special project, whatever their field, whatever they're designing, is just to be realistic and understand the cost from their point of view. So when you try to get a contractor to do something, don't expect it to be too cheap. And if it is too cheap, worry about it. Think to yourself, it's not going to come out right. It's not going to be what I'm intended. You've got to understand the costs yourself. So if you're asking for gold leaf to cover a wall, per square metre what that's going to be. If someone comes up and tells you it's £1 a square metre, you're getting some cheap yellow paint that isn't going to do the job. So really is to understand what you're trying to achieve, your budget and your costs, before or as you're talking to a contractor. And if it is too cheap or too good a deal, then, as I say, normally there's something wrong. It normally is. So I don't know whether that's answered what you...
Sounds very good advice to me. And Fenella?
I have beware of consultants, I think. I just think sometimes when we had people coming to help us or look at things, they would just want to do it the way they wanted to do it, and quite often people got quite excited about expressing their own kind of individuality, and it was actually really hard keeping the whole project sort of reined in, so that you didn't have people being over creative all over the place. And the other thing was people who said, "Oh yeah, you can do that," and then you say, "Oh yeah, okay, we'll do that," and then they go, "Oh, I don't know if you actually can do that." You know, it was just so annoying that nobody would actually sort of stand by what they said we were going to be able to do. That particularly happened with the concrete before we met Daren.
I was going to say, you're not talking about us there, are you?
No, not at all. No, it was the opposite. And also people wanting to do things in a way that is their way. So at one point there was a huge argument about whether we were going to be able to, people suggesting that we shouldn't use concrete at all, and it was a timber frame building, and I mean which would have completely changed. Oh, we can make it look like that, and that's just not the point. It wasn't the point of it. They just didn't understand the subtlety or the sort of essence of the project. I found that really irritating, and I also get annoyed if anyone says "with all due respect" to me. I get really, really annoyed.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably wrap up because we've gone slightly over. But thank you so much, Fenella and Daren. That was so interesting, and thanks for taking the time to tell us about your amazing project today.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
See people I know. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for coming. Thank you.